Hey AP Lang students, this is Kevin Steinhauser at Fiveable, and I'm excited to walk through rhetorical analysis today, continuing our journey all month long into really mastering the task, which is always, every single year with maybe one or two exceptions, the lowest of the three essays nationally. So that's why I'm starting with rhetorical analysis this year. Again, if you haven't been with us since the beginning, I do encourage you to go back and look at really starting in the very beginning of October. All of the live sessions that I've done, they're all available through replay, looking at rhetorical analysis. They're definitely meant to be done 1 week before the next. So we've looked week one at thinking like a critical analyzer, thinking like a college student when we're looking at someone else's text. Really just start looking at the purpose of it, where we need to go in terms of writing rhetorical analysis essays. And last week we looked at, or last couple weeks we looked at thesis statements and then figuring out what is worth writing about. So again, this is not a matching game. This is not about AP terminology. So I'm going to put that aside from the very get-go. This is about, simply put, can I as a student figure out what the author is saying and why the author is saying it? Once I do that, can I determine how the author gets the audience to move on an idea or a subject from one position to another? With all of that said, that's really all rhetorical analysis is. So we have to talk about audience. We have to talk about what did the audience believe before the speech, and what do they believe, or what is the speaker trying to get them to believe after the speech? That's what this is all about. You can get a 9 on this essay. Remember, the scale is 1 to 9, without mentioning a fancy term at all. You can get a 1 on this essay by mentioning the best, fanciest terms you can find. It's not about terminology at all. It's about getting into the speaker's head and figuring out how is he or she trying to move the audience towards his or her side. So we're going to launch in today knowing that we really are walking through this together. Again, starting out with how do we think through this stuff? And now we're finally going to get into some tangible, concrete, what do I put on the paper? So today we're going to look at introduction paragraphs, and next week we're going to to focus in on body paragraphs. Clearly next week's going to be super, super important, but first let's focus on introduction paragraphs. Next week, body paragraphs. I call this session Don't Sound Like a Rhetorical Robot. So I've been an AP reader several years. Couple years I've done the rhetorical analysis essay. There are a lot of rhetorical robots submitting essays. I mean that kind of tongue-in-cheek. Really, what I'm saying is they all sound the same. I want you to stand out. So you're part of Fiveable. We're shooting for that 5. I will show you, simply put, what do students do to get to that upper echelon? What do students do who kind of stay hesitant in the middle? So first today we'll look at what not to do, but then that's not very helpful if we don't know what to do. So I'll show you some trends of what so many students do with introductions. Introductions, and oftentimes you're not taught that, honestly. They're so important if you're shooting for a 4 or a 5. They're not super important if you're shooting for a 3 on this exam. That means you're shooting for like a 5 or a 6 on the essay. But if you're shooting for higher than a 6 on the essay, introductions are going to be super impactful for you. Again, next week we're doing body paragraphs, so definitely come in for that, because if you're shooting for a 3, you need to kick butt on the body paragraphs. If you're shooting for a 4 or a 5, you still need to kick butt on the body paragraphs. They are where you make your money. They're the cake. Introductions are basically the icing on the cake, like what is really going to set me apart. That's what we're going to focus on today. All right, so again, why are introductions important? All right, so the first reason is they set the tone for your entire essay. Think about it. Put yourself in my shoes as an AP reader. There's a lot of us, because AP language is such a big test. 500,000 plus people take it every single year. So there's a lot of us in a room. We're at a table and they just keep delivering us essays after essays, and it doesn't seem to end. It's days upon days of grading essays. And we all are selected to grade one of the 3 essays. So if I'm grading rhetorical analysis, I am grading rhetorical analysis essays 7 days in a row. Same topic. Just put yourself in my shoes really quickly. I'm going to be seeing a lot of the same analysis on the same passage, right? The way that you can stand out is by setting the tone immediately. This is your opportunity to stand out in a sea of essays. Again, 7 days straight of essays just funneling into me and I'm just grading them. Introductions stand out. You've heard me say this before if you've been with me. Every year I grade over 1,000 essays, and every year I can think of 4 to 8 that actually stand out that I still remember. All 4 to 8 of those every year have effective introduction paragraphs to the essay. Super, super great opportunity to stand out. Second reason why they're important, they just show me or whoever your reader is that you are in control of 2 things, a high level comprehension of the text and the analytical process. We're going to talk a little bit about the analytical process before we really get going today. But again, the writers who are uncomfortable and don't know what to do with an introduction oftentimes aren't fully confident in the text in front of them. Hopefully at this point in the year, you've seen plenty of actual AP prompts, or at least texts that are equivalent in difficulty. This is not, honestly, 11th grade, 12th grade material. This is college material. Can I read and comprehend the nuance of the text? If I can talk about it confidently. That's what I'm going to do in my introduction. I'm not just going to summarize the work. I'm not just going to summarize the context that's provided. I'm going to bring myself to the table. That's what this is all about. So again, introductions are important because off the bat, they are showing your reader, yes, I get this text. I'm in control of the analytical process. There's a third reason why introductions are important. They allow you to bring your own background knowledge into the essay. Think about it this way. Rhetorical analysis, you're pretty much confined to the parameters of whatever College Board gives you. Depending on the time period of the speech or the essay that you're analyzing, depends on what background knowledge you have, right? Some of you are going to have really good background knowledge on the 1960s, but maybe not so much 1800s, and vice versa. The more background knowledge you have, the more readily you are able to bring that background knowledge to this essay. So you're not going to start randomly talking about background knowledge of the 1800s if this is written in the 1960s. But if you have background knowledge in the 1960s regarding the subject that you're talking about, you're bringing that knowledge to the table, and I'll show you how to do that today very, very practically, tangibly. The most confident, capable writers take this opportunity to show off what they know, but they're still holding the parameters of the work. So you're not going off on tangents. You're really streamlining, and you can't really effectively introduce your essay if you don't know what your thesis is going to be. So we did thesis last week, or in a previous session. Thesis statements is all about purpose, audience, and then the general writing trends. So I'll show you that again today. But again, I have to know what my thesis is going to say before I know how I'm going to effectively build to my thesis. So please keep that in mind. As I'm brainstorming and crafting my essay, I have to know what my thesis is going to say. I have to therefore identify the purpose and the audience, and then I can build towards that. Effective rhetorical analysis introduction paragraphs explain the rhetorical situation of the work being analyzed. Remember, we've talked about that weeks ago. The rhetorical situation is who is the audience, who's the intended audience, who's the speaker, what's the subject, and how are they all interrelated. So yes, we are looking at the rhetorical triangle for the 4th week in a row. What we need to think about, what does the audience already believe about the subject, and how is the speaker talking to them directly to get them to move their mindset on the given subject. That's all this is. Think about that side of the triangle, that right half. Subject, audience, what's their relation? How's the speaker trying to get them moving to a certain extent? All right, guys, we're going to start looking into some common trends. I think this is going to be really useful, mainly because I know where we're headed, and we're going to be looking at some better alternatives. But I want you to see, and you might kind of self-identify, what have I been doing this year? What would I do if I was to write a rhetorical analysis essay today? So many students do one of these 3 problems that I'm about to show you. Some problems, like I said, they can get you to a 3, but I'm pushing you to get a 4 or 5 on this test. So that's going to equivalent to a 7, 8, or 9 on this rhetorical analysis essay. Average scores every year are a little bit below a 5, somewhere between a 4 and a 5. So clearly, I'm not teaching you just to get to that 5. I'm teaching you to get to that higher score range. Next week, body paragraphs are to get you that 5 and up, right? This week, let's really focus on pushing our introductions to set the tone, to set the groundwork for the rest of the essay. Here's what not to do. I actually graded this essay, so I'm going to tell you, this is 2015. On the 10th anniversary of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King, this is Cesar Chavez publishing an article. So it says, labor union organizer and civil rights leader Cesar Chavez published an article in the magazine of a religious organization devoted to helping those in need. Read the following excerpt from the article carefully, then in a well-written essay, analyze the rhetorical choices Chavez makes to develop his argument about nonviolent resistance. That is exactly what College Board gave students in 2015. Please read the context. That is super, super useful. However, I'm going to show you what so many students did as introduction. Top 3 most common introductions. So I call them common problems, but really they're just introductions that I see every single year that I go down there. So in 2015, I graded this essay prompt. This is the first problem that I saw. Parroting the prompt. Students simply wanted to go back to this and just tell me exactly what I just read in the context. So if you're parroting the prompt, you're either paraphrasing or quoting what we just read, what College Board provided. Problem for 2 reasons. First, honestly, you're wasting time. You are not giving credit. You are not given credit for simply citing College Board, right? Introduction is time to put your own voice and thoughts in terms of the rhetorical situation into your essay, not just tell me what College Board just told me, right? You're getting 0 points. You're getting 0 reward for just telling me what College Board told you, right? And honestly, this is the bigger problem than just wasting your time, because you only got 40 minutes, including reading. So that's a big deal. We don't want to waste any time. But here's the bigger problem. If all you know how to do in the moment is tell me what College Board just told you, then you're indicating to me, the reader, that you are not in control of the reading or the analytical task. You're relying on someone else's words. You're relying on a College Board to provide the context of a rhetorical situation. I'll show you what to do later, but if you have to rely on College Board's words or someone else's words, you're not in control yourself. That's why it's a signal to me as a reader, okay, you can still get a 5 or a 6, but you're kind of giving yourself an uphill battle. You're indicating to me you're not very confident in this writing task. That's not what you want to do. You want to set a tone of like, oh, wow, you're really in control. You know exactly what you should do and you're doing it well. That's where you want to set the tone for your introductions, not citing College Board essentially. Now, it could look of one of 2 ways for this problem. It could directly quote, and sometimes students put it in quotation marks. Don't, and just kind of want to take credit for College Board's words. Let's just look at it. On the 10th anniversary of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., labor union organizer and civil rights leader Cesar Chavez published an article in the magazine of a religious organization, blah, blah, blah. We just read that. That's College Board. If you're writing that in your introduction, you're indicating to me you don't know what to say, so you're just quoting somebody else. If you're quoting somebody else, you're not the writer. You're just rewriting their words. You could paraphrase, which is a little bit better than just directly quoting. But look at this. I mean, I saw so many sentences like this. Cesar Chavez was a labor union organizer, and he was also a civil rights leader like Martin Luther King Jr. He wrote an article that appeared in a religious magazine on the anniversary of King's death. All of that is true, and all of that is context, but it's not bringing yourself to the table. It is simply paraphrasing College Board's words. Same problem as the first variant where you're just quoting. You are not bringing yourself to the table. You're indicating to me that you have no idea what else to say for your introduction, and you're not in control of the writing task. Again, I saw so many papers that were 4s, 5s, 6s on that 1 to 9 scale that had introductions like this, and then there'd be a thesis. But this is not why a student would have gotten a 5 or a 6. Their body paragraphs would have crossed them across the finish line. This is an ineffective introduction because you're not bringing yourself to the table. Common problem 2 is super common. Only writing a thesis statement, having a one-sentence introduction. All across the country, a lot of teachers and even consultants say, you don't need an introduction, don't waste your time with it, just get your thesis and move on. Here's why teachers and consultants say that. They are trying to get you to the 5 or the 6, which is a total reality that I fully understand. So maybe today's session, I want you focusing on, but I'm going to talk a little bit about timing tension in a little while. You only have 40 minutes on this task. Maybe you're not ready for an effective introduction, like focusing all in on that until you're getting 5s and 6s because of your body paragraphs, your analysis. So next week's going to be super crucial for you. But don't forget about this session. Maybe go back to it when you feel like you're ready. Once I'm getting 5s and 6s, how do I push to 7s, 8s, and 9s? Effective introductions are a key way to do so. So again, the reason why teachers might say only write a thesis is because that's just the reality of where you're at. In 40 minutes, you've got to read the text, you've got to understand the text, you've got to have some awesome analysis. I totally get that. But if you only are writing a thesis statement, you're indicating to me that you don't have control, or you're not bringing yourself to the floor as much as I want you to. You're basically just missing this opportunity to set yourself apart, to show what you know, and to show that you're in control of the reading, and you're bringing yourself in as a thinker when you're thinking about the analytical task. When I say analytical task, go back to the rhetorical triangle. What does the audience already think about the subject? And how is the speaker trying to move the audience in one direction? If you're not providing thoughtful context, you're just missing that opportunity. Again, you can still get a 5 or a 6. Hey, you might even be able to get a higher score, but it's going to be an uphill battle because you're indicating to the reader, I'm not really bringing myself, I'm only relying on the passage in front of me. So it's important to do that, but to put your own thoughts in. What do you know about the audience at the time? What do you know about the audience's relation to the subject at the time? That's what this context is going to be. Here's the last problem. This is probably the least common. I'd say, honestly, I put them in order of most common problems to least, but these are still hundreds, thousands of students do each one of these every single year. This common problem is not including an introduction paragraph at all. I've talked to really good teachers who teach their students, hey, don't even worry about introduction, just jump in. And I've read really good essays that do that, but it's hard to pull off. We're trained as readers just to be like, okay, does this student have a good grasp of the rhetorical process here, the analytical process? Does the student have clear vision, organization, and direction for the paper? You're showing me both of those through your introduction paragraphs. You can show me otherwise. I'm teaching the most, today when I'm teaching you how to write an effective introduction paragraph, I'm teaching you what I think is the easiest way to get there and hit those high marks. There's a lot of ways that you could do it. You can write a 9 essay without an introduction paragraph. It's just way harder to pull off. I don't recommend going for it. Again, you're missing out on the opportunity to show what you know regarding the analytical task in the rhetorical situation. And here's another thing. This is why I say it's hard to pull off. It's rare to see a 9 essay without an effective introduction. It happens every year, but it's very rare. You might, if you're rushing in without an introduction, you might not be taking the time necessary to ensure that you are writing about what's worth writing about. That was my whole live session last week. Identifying what's worth writing about, including that in your thesis statement. So if you are not writing an introduction, it's possible to get a 9, but it's very unlikely that that's going to be your reality. I'd say and this is just an estimate based on my experience, but clearly that's just an estimate. For every 1 essay who scores a 9 without an introduction paragraph, there are 300 that score below a 6 without an introduction paragraph. So clearly, I'm not talking about the 1 in 1,000 paper. I'm talking about, okay, I know what I'm doing. I know what I want to do, but how do I get across that finish line? How do I raise my score on rhetorical analysis essays? Let's focus on what to do as we're looking forward. Keeping in mind, I mentioned this earlier, don't spend too much time on introduction paragraphs. That's the tension. My students, the first month of school, we build skill. We don't worry about time in writing. we're at the point in the school year now that we are timing ourselves. But at the beginning, hey, we were taking 30 minutes to write a beautiful introduction paragraph just to make sure we knew what we were doing and how to do it. Well, clearly that's not going to work. If we have 40 minutes to write this essay, I can't spend more than 10 minutes on an intro. Honestly, I want to spend 10, 12 minutes reading, comprehending, and identifying what's worth writing about. Then I want to crank out a really effective introduction, honestly, in like 7 or 8 minutes. The rest of my time, so I still have like 20 some minutes left, is spent on my body paragraphs, the last 2 minutes on a conclusion. I know a lot of teachers, myself included, always fight that battle of tension of, well, how much proofreading and revising do I have time for? And the longer I work with AP language students, the more that I'm realizing you can't assume you can't dedicate time, more than a minute or two maybe per essay, to go back and revise and proofread. So honestly, you've got to figure out what works best for you. And what I tell my students all the time is, what you think you wrote is often not what you actually wrote. So they're looking for little easy errors that you can clean up. But when it comes to proofreading, honestly, it's so important to just do it right the first time. Take your time. I know you're like on a time crunch. Take your time to write, slowly and effectively, like crafting your sentences. And obviously, there's tension there because like you want to write as much as you can, as effectively as you can, but not rushing where you're to the point of making mistakes. So you're just writing as fast as you can while still holding yourself to a high writing standard. With all of that said, keep in mind the majority of your time in every essay, argument, synthesis, rhetorical analysis, should be spent in your body paragraphs. But for each one, I'm going to help you this year as we go through Fiveable to write effective introductions as well. Do you want to set yourself apart from a sea of essays? If so, set the tone from the beginning. You just can't take more than 10 minutes on it clearly, right? So that's the tension here. All right, so like I said, now it's what to do. I'm going to show you literally what a really effective body, why it's effective. Again, there are many right ways to organize your thoughts and analysis here. I do recommend having your thesis as your last sentence of your introduction paragraph. What I'm going to focus on today is what I think is the easiest, most logical, most common way to effectively write an argument, an introduction to an analytical task. Sorry, that was a little my bad on the wording on that. The most effective way to write a rhetorical analysis introduction. Step 1, and again, I'm going to get to a very tangible, this is what it looks like. But step 1 is providing thoughtful context. Go beyond what's in front of the page. Again, if you are simply citing or quoting or paraphrasing College Board's context, you're not providing thoughtful context, you're providing their context. So you have to go beyond what's in the page. Think about what you know about the subject and who the audience would be, and what the audience believe about the subject. That's what it is. My second sentence here says it really succinctly. Think about what was happening in the world at the time in regards to the subject. You're going to put those thoughts on paper. That's really impressive. If you could bring yourself to the forefront there, just for a few sentences, you are going to set yourself apart from thousands of other essays, I guarantee you. Step 1, why is it important? Again, you're showing off what you know. A lot of students love argumentation essays. A lot of students love synthesis essays. A lot of students hate rhetorical analysis essays. And a lot of times they say, well, I feel like I'm in a box. Like argumentation, I can basically use any evidence that I'm about. Rhetorical analysis, I am like kind of confined to the parameters of the passage. That is certainly true. This is your time to shine. If that's you, you're like, I really want to bring more of my voice to the table. Show the reader how confident you are in the text by bringing yourself to the table here. This is your time to really show what you know. All right, once you've done that, a few sentences. Step 2, you're building to your thesis. Talk specifically about the speaker of the work. Who are they? What do they believe? What are their credentials, etc. Whatever best applies. Talk about the occasion of the work. That kind of builds from step 1. Again, I'll show you a clear step 1, 2, and 3 breakdown here in a bit. The occasion of the work is, again, what is going on in the world about the subject. Lastly, what's the subject? Clearly, that's going to naturally fit into your bridging to your thesis. So step one is a bigger picture, what's going on in the world. Step two is starting to zone into the actual work itself. Who's the speaker? What's the subject of the work? Step three, we spent, well, hold on, let's not get too quick. Step three is thesis, but let's look at step two real quick. This portion of your introduction paragraph sets up the rhetorical situation. You're going to spend the rest of your essay unpacking it in detail, but take some time up front to really show your reader, I know what's worth talking about, and I have a good sense of the rhetorical triangle, the rhetorical situation. If I rush into it, you can still have a solid score, but this just indicates to your reader, okay, this student knows exactly what they're supposed to be doing here. All right, I was rushing ahead. Step three is so important. It's one sentence. Thesis statement. Again, I spent an hour 2 weeks ago, my live session on thesis statements. Please make sure you go to that. I know that seems a little crazy to spend an hour on one sentence. Hey, you're going to be writing thesis statements all year and into college. Let's make sure they're perfect. So I spent some time 2 weeks ago talking about perfect thesis statements. You're clearly stating the purpose. You're clearly stating the audience of the work, and you're identifying the most important writing trends. I'm not going to unpack that and really teach that today, because I did that 2 weeks ago. So please go check out that replay if you didn't catch it live, or anytime throughout this year. If any of these replays you're like, hey, I want to go back and see what we talked about with introduction paragraphs or thesis statements or what's worth talking about. That's what these replays are there for. They're not meant to only be seen once in October and forgotten about. We're always building upon these live sessions. They build upon each other. So again, feel free to go back and check those out. You don't have to watch the whole thing, like maybe just go back to certain parts of it that you need a quick refresher on. Thesis statements are super, super important. Again, I recommend putting them as the last sentence of your introduction paragraph. It shows that you are in full control of the analytical task because you are focusing on what needs to be focused on. Your thesis should not use terminology. I know that's a controversial statement. That's fully what I believe. Your thesis should not say things like juxtaposition, anaphora, metonymy, synecdoche, aphorism, rhetorical questions. Look at the bigger picture. By doing so, you're telling your reader, okay, I know what I'm supposed to do here. I'm in control of the writing task. If your thesis statement says, and again, I unpacked this 2 weeks ago, those terms, and that's it, you're indicating to your writer, okay, they might be playing the matching game. This is not a matching game. Remember, we've talked about that. All right, and it also shows you're just holding yourself to that high standard. Okay, am I writing about what's worth writing about, or am I falling into the trap of the matching game? The matching game seems nice, and it sounds really intellectual. I see an aphorism in paragraph 3, but that is not the point of this at all. So by avoiding the matching game, by doing high-level thesis statements instead, you are showing both yourself and your reader, I'm ready to move on to body paragraphs. I know exactly the purpose of this task. We're going to practice with this. I keep coming back to this in our rhetorical analysis unit intentionally. Instead of mastering a bunch of different texts, if you've been with me, we've looked at this almost every week in part. The first rhetorical analysis, think with a rhetorical mind, process that we went through, talked about this at length. So we're going to just look at a couple paragraphs of Reagan, and then I'm going to show you my introduction paragraph for this analytical task. If this passage was an AP passage, I'm going to show you what my introduction paragraph would look like. So if you haven't been with me, or just as a refresher, President Ronald Reagan was supposed to give the State of the Union on January 28, 1986. He called an audible. He had an address to the nation about the terrible events of the day, the explosion of the Space Shuttle Challenger. So again, put yourself into the context. We said put yourself into the context since day one, and we really unpacked that. That is a useful thing to go back. I just went through and thought aloud, how would I think as a critical reader and thinker as I'm reading Reagan's words here? So that's a good live session to go back and watch the replay for. For today, we're going to look at a little bit of what Reagan said, and then we're going to unpack how would a solid introduction paragraph look. Just want to remind you, if you're in the live session, to post them if you have any today as we go, and we'll go ahead and launch into the live session. All right, so initial thoughts of this text. The nation is in mourning after watching the explosion live. Everyone has figured out, or everyone has been watching live this tragedy that has occurred. Everyone's still reeling from that terrible reality that they witnessed through TV. Remember, at the time in the 80s, astronauts were big-time American heroes. President Reagan knows that the American public is looking for reassurance. So that's where he's starting a speech. We're just going to look at the very first few paragraphs of the speech. We won't take too long doing a quick think aloud. I will quickly read through that just to ground us in what would I talk about as I'm writing my introduction paragraph. I just stole these slides from our first live session, so I'm not going to nearly go into the depth that we did there, but just to get us back into the zone here for Reagan's speech. On the left are Reagan's words. On the right are my analytical thoughts as I go. So we went through the entire speech a few weeks back. Let's just quickly go through the first few paragraphs again. So Reagan says, "Ladies and gentlemen, I plan to speak to you tonight to report on the State of the Union. But the events of earlier today have led me to change those plans. Today is a day for mourning and remembering." So my analytical thoughts here, as I'm reading, as a critical thinker, I'm thinking he's emphasizing the magnitude of the day's events. He's meeting the audience for where they are. They need to mourn. He's mourning with them. Again, I want you all to think about the rhetorical triangle. The audience thinks about the subject, which is the death of the astronauts. This is terrible. We're in mourning. And Reagan does as well, right? So right now he's not trying to move the needle. He's reinforcing their beliefs. Reagan continues to say, "Nancy and I are pained to the core by the tragedy of the shuttle Challenger. We know we share this pain with all of the people of our country. This is truly a national loss." So as I'm reading that, I'm thinking he's bringing a human element into the speech. He's emphasizing that he has a lot in common with the American audience. He's in pain just like they are. Let's go to the next one. He says, 19 years ago, almost to the day, we lost 3 astronauts in a terrible accident on the ground. But we've never lost an astronaut in flight. We've never had a tragedy like this. My analytical thoughts here are he's highlighting the uniqueness of the tragedy. I want to remind you, if you were or if you were not able to watch my first session on this speech where I really unpacked it, where he's going to go is we need to recommit to American space travel. We are not going to let this tragedy stop us from our goal. That's super important to keep in mind. So we're not going to look at all of his speech tonight, but remember that he has a twofold purpose here. One is to mourn with the American public, but second is the more one where he needs them moving on. We need to recommit to space exploration. A lot of Americans might be thinking, okay, is this worth it? He's knowing where he's going in the speech. So he's saying, yes, I want you to know this is a terrible thing, and I'm not taking anything away from that. But this is unique. This is not a common thing. We are not going to let this terrible tragedy sway us from our ultimate goals. All right, Reagan says next, and perhaps we've forgotten the courage it took for the crew of the shuttle, but they, the Challenger 7, were aware of the dangers, but overcame them and did their jobs brilliantly. He describes the astronauts as courageous heroes, again, still aligning himself with his audience. The American public knows and believes that the astronauts are heroes. Reagan is really emphasizing what he believes and what they have in common as an audience and as a speaker. Before he launches into where they might diverge, or again, some audience members might think this is not worth doing again. We don't want to go through this again as a country. He's going to say, okay, we have to accept the possibility of tragedy in order to move the needle of space exploration. So just keeping all of that big picture in mind. Now let's go back to step 1. And obviously, you're not going to write an introduction paragraph without reading the whole passage. That's why I chose this one. We've read the whole passage together before in a previous live session. So assuming we've read the whole passage, we're thinking about what's worth writing about. We think about our thesis first, actually. So we got to identify the purpose, the audience, and the overall writing trend. Then we can launch into the context. So I'm kind of going out of order today, just to see step 1, step 2, step 3 in order. But again, as you're working through this, I really think it's important to gather your thoughts. Some of you might even want to pre-write your thesis. Some of you might want to bullet point your thesis. But take the time up front to pre-write and plan. Obviously, you got to be going quickly, but I'd rather have you write a little bit too short of an essay that's awesome than write a 5-page essay that's mediocre. Right? So just keep that in mind. Quality first, and then quantity. So I figured out my thesis. I figured out what I'm going to say. What is my thoughtful context? Again, the point of thoughtful context is going beyond what's in the page in front of you. So I don't have a College Board description or context for Ronald Reagan's speech because it's not been a passage. But generally, they would just be summarizing the events of the day and the fact that the American public is watching this address on TV instead of the State of the Union. They probably would also say the country's in mourning. Stuff like that, very generic stuff that, honestly, I mean, I don't mean generic to be negative. College Board gives you a very succinct, useful context. But if that's all I can use in my intro, I am not really taking the opportunity that's presented to me here. So again, you're thinking about what's happening in the world around you. Here is what my introduction would be. So I typed it up, it's long. It looks like it's, I think, 4 sentences. I get that not everyone's going to be able to execute a really effective introduction in 7 or 8 minutes. But I want to show you the bar. I want to show you the bar to try to strive towards this year. So step 1, I'm providing thoughtful context. I'm not really focusing on Reagan yet. I'm not really focusing on the Challenger explosion yet, other than my first line where I allude to it. Let's read it, and I'll explain why it's effective as I go in at the end. In 1986, when the Challenger space shuttle exploded, America was entrenched in a decades-long Cold War. So if you have background knowledge on like the space race and the Cold War, you could bring that. If not, you've got to think about something else that you can talk about. We're still talking about space exploration. I mentioned the Challenger explosion from the beginning because I'm indicating to my reader, yeah, I'm not way off. Like I'm talking about this exact day, this exact subject, but let me take a minute to kind of give you the context. Let's read the second sentence of my intro. The space race with Russia that was at its height in the 1950s and 1960s was an essential part of the American fabric. So I'm acknowledging we're not at the heyday of the space race. We're still in the Cold War. We're in the 80s. These people who are alive in the 80s watching this tragedy on the TV, many of them lived through the 50s and 60s, the space race. Many of them lived very much like the prime of their lives in the Cold War. So that's what I'm bringing to the table right now. It's an essential part of the American fabric. It's been decades in the making. Let's read my third sentence. Nothing fancy in this sentence. Space exploration and navigation went hand in hand with American national pride. Nothing fancy there. In fact, hand in hand is kind of a casual phrase. Don't worry about trying to sound smart. Don't worry about, don't hear me wrong. Everything I'm saying is smart, but don't worry about over impressing me with your vocabulary. Just say the perfect word that proves your point or that makes your case. Let's read my next sentence. It's actually my 4th sentence. So I have 5 sentences here, but no, these couple are kind of short. Astronauts were not just scientists. They were American heroes. Now, why is that worth me bringing to the table? I'm going to talk a lot about that in my body paragraphs. I'm going to talk a lot about how the audience believed that the astronauts were American heroes, and Ronald Reagan aligns himself with his audience here. So it's worth me bringing up the things that I'm going to unpack a lot further in my essay. Again, I've alluded to the Challenger space shuttle explosion, but that's not my focus and my context. I'm looking broader, more globally. All right, last sentence of step 1 reads, when a shuttle launched in the 1980s, it was a cause for public celebration, and Americans across the country would pause their daily routines to watch their latest national achievement. Again, I'm talking about the broader context here. I'm not going rogue. I'm not talking about anything I feel like in the 1980s. I'm talking about what's happening in regards to the subject, which is space exploration. I hope this is helpful in seeing what's worth talking about at the onset. What's worth talking about in step 1 when I'm providing thoughtful context. Not going rogue and talking about too much, like off topic, but broadening it out, not talking about just the space shuttle explosion. I'm getting there. That's going to be starting to happen in step 2. Step 2 is specifically speaker, occasion, and subject. Weave this information in as you build toward your thesis. So again, I have my thesis in mind. I might have pre-written it, but I'm not there yet. I have to bridge to step 2. If I did this is effective, but then I just threw a thesis down, that'd be awkward and clunky. So step 2 is super important to naturally bridge to my thesis. Let me show you what that's going to look like. This would go right after step 1, same paragraph. It is with this cultural backdrop that Americans watched in horror as the Challenger shuttle burst into flames, killing 7 of the most public American heroes. As President Ronald Reagan knew he had a big job ahead of him that evening as he addressed a mourning nation. So I've talked about the speaker, I've talked about the subject, I've talked about the specific occasion. The occasion of the work is he's addressing the nation the day of this terrible tragedy. So I hope you're seeing step 1 is broader, step 1 is more global, but it's still talking about the subject. And really still talking about the occasion. This is more specific occasion, what's happening the day of the speech. Step 1's occasion is what's happening in the world in this like time period. Step 2 is the day of the speech, what actually is happening. Now we're ready for our thesis. I hope you see this is a very natural bridge. Usually this is very true. Step 1 is the longest step. Step 2 is a quick bridge, but an effective bridge. So the second longest step. And then step 3 is the shortest step. It's only one sentence. It's our thesis. Again, I'm clearly stating the purpose, the audience of the work, and the most important writing trends. I mentioned a couple weeks ago when we focused on thesis, identifying the writing trend is difficult because it's easier just to list juxtaposition, pathos, and metaphor, right? But that's very low, like a low bar. The real bar is finding what's worth talking about and unpacking it very in detail. I'm not going to, again, take a lot of time teaching thesis tonight. I've done that 2 weeks ago. Definitely something to make sure you've checked out at some point. Here's my thesis for this work. I love that phrase, in order to. I always start my thesis statements with them for rhetorical analysis because in order to, purpose. In order to convince Americans of the importance of moving forward while mourning the tragic loss of these 7 astronauts, Reagan both celebrates the lives of those lost and recognizes the importance of keeping the space program's goals intact. That's the writing trend. Celebrates the lives of those lost, recognizes the importance. I have to know that's about what I'm going to say. I might not have the wording nailed. I might sit there and pre-write it, but I have to know that's what I'm talking about because that's how I'm crafting step 1 and 2. Remember, I said, let's go back to step 1, guys. Astronauts were not just scientists, they were American heroes. Remember I said, I'm doing that deliberately because I'm going to unpack that later. Back to my thesis, celebrating the lives of those lost. Clearly, I'm having their heroes in mind here. That's what I'm going to unpack in future body paragraphs. Next week, we're going to spend our entire live session building forward. Now that we have effective intros, or at least we know what the bar looks like, now we just got to strive to get there in time. We're going to spend our time with effective body paragraphs. That's probably the most practical, important live session in the entire month of October for AP Line. Just wanted you to know where we're headed, but let's take a minute for fluency, for just looking at the big picture, how this all fits together. I was interrupting myself, I was explaining. I want to make sure we see really quickly, this is how an introduction paragraph should look and sound. Again, don't misunderstand me today. There are many ways to write an effective introduction analysis paragraph, but they're all going to have these same components. I think this structure makes the most sense. I think it's a formula, but really I'm not teaching a formula. I'm just saying include all 3 of these pieces, right? This isn't super formulaic. I could say include step 1, 2, and 3, and we all have to rely on our own background knowledge to execute this effectively. So let's just read, let's take 1 minute to read how this sounds together without breaks. 1986, when the Challenger space shuttle exploded, America was entrenched in a decades-long Cold War. The space race with Russia, that was at its height in the 1950s and 1960s, was an essential part of the American fabric. Space exploration and navigation went hand in hand with American national pride. Astronauts were not just scientists, they were American heroes. When a shuttle launched in the 1980s, it was a cause for public celebration, and Americans across the country would pause their daily routines to watch their latest national achievement. It is with this cultural backdrop that Americans watched in horror as the Challenger shuttle burst into flames, killing 7 of the most public American heroes. As president, Ronald Reagan knew he had a big job ahead of him that evening as he addressed a mourning nation. In order to convince Americans of the importance of moving forward, while mourning the tragic loss of these 7 astronauts, Reagan both celebrates the lives of those lost and recognizes the importance of keeping the space program's goals intact. That's impressive if we can get that, and really effective body paragraphs. Nothing about my language here is super impressive. Well, I'm not impressing my reader or my college professor one day with my language, with my thoughts. I'm sorry, with my language, with my words only. I'm impressing them with my thoughts. So don't hear me wrong. It's important to use precise, effective language and varied sentence structure and all the things that you're working on this year. But I can't put the cart before the horse. I have to think like a college student. I have to think like an adult. I have to think really critically about the world around me. That's what this course is all about. Are you able to craft your own voice and understand the world around you? That's really impressive if you can do that, again, in a 40-minute time setting. So I want you to see the bar. Feel free to go back, watch replay, pause on this slide. Make sure you are seeing this is the bar I want to get to. Again, it doesn't have to be this format. I just think this is the easiest way to check all the boxes. I'm providing context, I'm bridging the gap, and I'm starting to talk about the occasion of the work in particular. And then obviously I have a really awesome thesis statement. So our final reminders of the night. Rhetorical analysis introduction paragraphs are your time to show off what you know. Make sure you're bringing yourself to the table. You're not just citing College Board, right? You're not just relying on someone else's awesome thoughts and context. Lastly, the function of these paragraphs are to set up the rhetorical situation of the work being analyzed. Everything I just did in that model body or introduction paragraph, is leaning in towards the rhetorical situation. Here's what's happening in the world. Here's what's happening in the day of the speech, like why Reagan's giving the speech. And then here's what Reagan is doing. The thesis is this is what he does to prove his point. All right, stay with us as we go. There's one more week in October. Next week is, again, probably the most important week. Now, the goal was that you've seen all of these live videos, either live or in replay. So you're ready to go next week, hit the ground running. But next week's going to be a super important week. So let's go ahead and get this back wrapping up today. What we want to make sure, everybody, is that we are looking at a very important tracking of the session, tracking of our thoughts at a college level. All right, guys, I will see you next week with rhetorical analysis body paragraph. Good night, everybody.